The cowboy's dog vanished for 2 nights, then returned with an Apache widow begging for shelter. He paused for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty around him. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with low hills and patches of dry grass. This was the cowboy's world, a life of solitude and hard work, where every sunrise brought a new set of chores and every sunset brought a quiet, reflective evening. By his side trotted Scout, his faithful border collie, who wagged his tail and barked softly as if to say good morning. Scout had been with the cowboy for many years, a companion through lonely days and rough nights. The cowboy often said that Scout understood him better than any person ever could. The dog had a sharp mind and a keen sense of danger, and the cowboy relied on him more than he would admit. Life on the ranch was simple, yet it demanded constant effort. The cowboy's days began before the sun fully touched the horizon. First came the care of the animals. He would walk among the cattle, checking on each one, making sure they were healthy and that none had wandered too far. The plains were vast, and straying livestock could quickly become lost or fall prey to wild animals. Scout helped with this task, nipping gently at the heels of the more stubborn cows, guiding them back toward the corral with the precision of a seasoned helper. After tending the cattle, the cowboy would check the fences, a never-ending task in the open plains. Wind, rain, and time could weaken the wooden posts, and a broken fence could mean disaster. As he worked, Scout never left his side. The dog's sharp eyes would scan the horizon, ears perked for any unusual sound. Together, they were a team, silently communicating in ways only they seemed to understand. Despite the hard work, the cowboy found comfort in the routine. There was a rhythm to his life that suited him. Each morning brought fresh hope, and each evening brought quiet reflection. He often sat by the fire after dinner, Scout curled up at his feet, and thought about the world beyond the plains. Letters from townsfolk, visits from travelers, or even a rare passing wagon offered glimpses of life outside his ranch. Yet, he preferred his quiet existence, finding peace in the simplicity of the land and the company of his loyal dog. The cabin was small and sturdy, made of rough-hewn logs and a simple roof. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and leather, a place where one could feel both comfort and safety. There were few belongings, just the necessities. A table, a couple of chairs, a small bed, and a wooden chest that held the cowboy's personal items. Everything in the cabin had a purpose, much like life on the plains itself. The cowboy believed in keeping things simple, and Scout had his own corner near the fire, a place of warmth and rest after a long day of work. The cowboy often reflected on how he had come to this life. He had grown up in a small town, but the crowded streets and endless noise had never suited him. The plains called to him with their open skies and the freedom to live without the pressures of others. At first, it had been a lonely choice, but Scout's presence had turned solitude into companionship. The dog had been a gift from a traveling rancher who had passed through many years ago, a gift that had changed the cowboy's life in ways he could never fully describe. One particular morning, the cowboy set out early with Scout to check on the northern part of the ranch, where the grass was thicker and the water more plentiful. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The air smelled fresh, carrying hints of wildflowers from the nearby hills. As he rode, Scout ran ahead, darting between tufts of grass, then circling back to make sure his companion was safe. The bond between the two was clear to anyone who might have seen them. They were more than man and dog. They were partners, sharing both work and life. As they reached the northern grazing fields, the cowboy spotted a small herd of cattle gathered near a stream. The animals were calm, drinking from the clear water and grazing quietly. Scout moved carefully among them, barking softly when a stray tried to wander too far. The cowboy smiled, appreciating the dog's intelligence and loyalty. These moments, simple as they were, gave him a sense of purpose and pride. Life on the ranch was not without danger. Coyotes and wolves roamed the plains, and a careless step could lead to injury for both man and beast. But the cowboy felt prepared. He carried his rifle, not for sport but for protection, and Scout's presence added an extra layer of security. The dog's instincts were keen, and more than once he had alerted the cowboy to approaching danger, saving both of them from potential harm. Despite the hard work and constant vigilance, there were moments of unexpected beauty. The plains had a way of showing their wonders when one least expected it. A rainbow after a sudden rainstorm, the distant cry of an eagle, or the golden glow of sunset reflecting off the hills could make even the toughest cowboy pause in admiration. These moments reminded him why he had chosen this life: freedom, peace, and the simple joys that could not be found in crowded towns or bustling cities. Scout had his own little rituals too. Each morning before the work began, he would run a short distance, chasing imaginary creatures or rolling in the grass. At night, he would lie by the fire, sometimes resting his head on the cowboy's boot, sometimes sitting alert, ears twitching at every sound outside. The cowboy would watch him, often chuckling quietly to himself. "You're a clever dog, Scout," he would say, "one of the best companions a man could ask for." The cowboy's life was quiet, predictable, and often lonely, but he had no regrets. He found joy in the simplicity of his work, the loyalty of his dog, and the endless beauty of the land around him. Every morning brought new opportunities to tend to the ranch, care for the animals, and enjoy the company of his faithful friend. The plains were vast, the work was hard, but the freedom and peace made every challenge worthwhile. On that particular morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the cowboy felt a sense of contentment. Scout barked in the distance, chasing a rabbit across the field, and the cowboy laughed. He knew that life would always have its difficulties, but for now, everything felt right. The ranch, the plains, the animals, and his dog, they were his world, a world he had chosen and cherished. Little did he know this peace would soon be interrupted. Scout, his loyal companion, would soon disappear for reasons he could not yet imagine, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he knew about loyalty, courage, and unexpected friendship. But for now, as he watched Scout dart across the fields, the cowboy felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had built and the faithful dog who had become his closest friend. The morning had begun like any other. The cowboy rose with the sun, poured himself a cup of strong coffee, and stepped outside to breathe in the fresh, crisp air of the plains. Scout, as usual, bounded out beside him, tail wagging and eyes bright with excitement. The dog had a way of making every day feel alive, even when life on the ranch was quiet and routine. That day, however, a strange feeling lingered in the cowboy's chest. He couldn't quite explain it, but something seemed different. Scout, usually full of energy and eager to explore, hesitated for a moment before following him. The cowboy shrugged it off, thinking perhaps the dog was just slower to wake. He saddled his horse and began the daily rounds, checking fences, inspecting the cattle, and scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. Scout trotted along, occasionally darting ahead and then circling back, alert as always. By late morning, the cowboy realized Scout was no longer at his side. He called the dog's name, but only the wind answered him. At first, he thought Scout had wandered a little too far while chasing a rabbit or exploring a nearby thicket. He whistled, clapped his hands, and even tried shaking a bag of feed, knowing that the smell of food often drew Scout back. But there was no sign of his loyal companion. A sense of unease began to creep in. Scout never strayed this far without warning. The dog was intelligent and cautious, loyal to the cowboy, and had never left the ranch alone. The cowboy's heart beat a little faster as he scanned the fields and hills. He rode toward the northern pastures, then the eastern hills, calling Scout's name over and over. His voice echoed across the plains, but there was no bark, no patter of paws, only the soft rustling of grass in the wind. Hours passed, and the cowboy's worry grew. He remembered the stories of wild animals roaming the plains, coyotes, wolves, even mountain lions. Scout was brave and clever, but he was still a dog, and danger was everywhere. The thought of his companion in harm's way made the cowboy's chest tighten with fear. He rode farther than he had ever gone before, following every path Scout might have taken, searching for signs of his tracks in the soft earth. By late afternoon, the cowboy returned to the cabin briefly to gather supplies: a rope, some extra food, a blanket, and his rifle. He knew he couldn't just wait. He had to search until he found Scout. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plains, and the cowboy felt the urgency of the moment. He mounted his horse again, determination in his eyes, and rode into the fading light, calling for Scout at every step. Night fell quickly in the open plains, faster than in towns with streetlights and buildings to slow the darkness. The cowboy's heart sank as he realized Scout was still missing. He tied his horse near the cabin, lit a small fire, and sat down to think. The flames crackled, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls, and the quiet of the night felt heavier than usual. The cowboy felt a loneliness he had never experienced, even in all the years he had lived alone on the ranch. Scout's absence left an empty space that nothing else could fill. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every sound outside made the cowboy's heart race: the wind whistling through the trees, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the cabin settling. He dreamed of Scout, chasing through the fields, barking happily, then suddenly vanishing, leaving him alone. Morning could not come soon enough, but he knew he had to be ready to search again at first light. When the sun finally rose, the cowboy saddled his horse and began a more organized search. He decided to divide the ranch into sections, methodically checking every field, hill, and water source. Scout had always been predictable in his habits. The cowboy thought that perhaps he had followed an animal or wandered toward a familiar trail. He scanned the horizon for any movement, listening carefully for the bark or the familiar sound of paws on hard ground. By midday, the cowboy had searched most of the nearby fields. He questioned himself quietly. Could Scout have been stolen? Could some traveler or passing bandit have taken him? The thought made the cowboy's stomach churn, but he pushed it aside. Scout was clever and resourceful. He had survived rough weather, wild animals, and long nights alone before. Perhaps he had simply wandered farther than usual and would return on his own. The second night without Scout was harder than the first. The cabin felt unusually silent. The absence of his companion was tangible. The cowboy sat by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about all the times Scout had saved him from danger, guided him through rough terrain, or simply offered comfort during lonely nights. The bond they shared was more than companionship. It was a silent understanding, a friendship built on trust and loyalty. He lay down for a few hours of restless sleep, only to wake repeatedly, convinced he heard Scout's bark in the distance. But each time it was just the wind. The cowboy's mind wandered to the possibility that Scout was in trouble. What if he had been caught in a trap or injured while exploring? The thought filled him with panic, but he knew he had to stay calm and continue searching. Panic would not help Scout, and the cowboy had learned over the years that clear thinking and careful observation were often the key to survival. The next morning, determined not to lose hope, the cowboy saddled his horse again and took a new approach. He decided to search along the river that ran near the western edge of the ranch, thinking that Scout might have followed the water to find animals to hunt or water to drink. The river's banks were lined with tall grass and rocks, making it easy for a dog to hide or get trapped. The cowboy called Scout's name again and again, listening for any reply. Hours passed with no response. As the day grew hotter, the cowboy began to feel the weight of exhaustion. His arms ached from holding the reins, his eyes burned from scanning the endless landscape, and his mind grew tired from constant worry. Yet he refused to give up. Scout was more than a pet. He was family, a companion who had never let him down. If Scout could survive, so could he, but he had to find him. By late afternoon, the cowboy noticed something unusual near a cluster of trees by the riverbank. The grass appeared flattened, as if something had run through it recently. He urged his horse forward, examining the ground carefully. There were paw prints, familiar paw prints. His heart leapt with hope. Scout had been here. The cowboy followed the tracks eagerly, calling the dog's name louder than ever. The trail led him through the trees and toward a small, hidden valley that he rarely visited. The valley was quiet, almost eerily so. The cowboy dismounted, tying his horse to a tree, and began searching on foot. He could see small signs of Scout, broken twigs, paw prints in soft soil, but the dog was nowhere in sight. The cowboy's worry grew, but he kept moving, scanning every shadow and listening intently. Every rustle of grass made him jump, but he refused to lose hope. Scout had always been clever and cautious, and the cowboy trusted that the dog was nearby. As the sun began to set on the second day, the cowboy reluctantly returned to the cabin. He was tired, hungry, and worried, but he refused to give up. He made a simple dinner by the fire, thinking about the plan for the next day. He would search the eastern hills in the morning, then the southern fields. He promised himself that he would not rest until Scout was back by his side. That night, lying in bed, the cowboy felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He imagined Scout wandering alone in the wilderness, searching for him just as he searched for Scout. He thought about the dangers the dog might face, wild animals, harsh terrain, and the uncertainty of being alone. But he also thought about Scout's intelligence and bravery. The dog had survived challenges before, and perhaps this time would be no different. As the wind whispered outside the cabin, the cowboy made a silent vow. No matter how long it took, no matter how far Scout had gone, he would find his loyal companion. He had faced many challenges in his life, but losing Scout was a challenge he could not accept. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and he knew that somehow they would be reunited. Little did the cowboy know that Scout had not simply wandered away. Something extraordinary had happened, something that would test not only the loyalty of a dog, but also the compassion and courage of the cowboy. The next morning would bring unexpected surprises, a new presence at the cabin, and a lesson in trust and humanity that neither man nor dog could have predicted. But for now, the cowboy rested, eyes half-closed, heart heavy with worry yet clinging to hope, listening for the sound of paws on the earth and a familiar bark that would signal the beginning of an unforgettable turn in their lives. The third morning arrived with a soft golden light spilling across the plains. The cowboy rose before the sun, the weight of the previous 2 days pressing heavily on his shoulders. Sleep had been restless, his dreams haunted by thoughts of Scout lost somewhere in the vast wilderness. Yet he rose with determination, knowing that hope was the only thing that kept him moving. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. The fields were quiet, the wind rustling gently through the tall grass. There was a stillness in the air that made the cowboy feel both uneasy and expectant. He saddled his horse with swift, careful hands, calling Scout's name as he rode toward the northern hills. His voice echoed faintly over the landscape, carrying through the open air. There was still no reply, but he refused to give up. As the day warmed, the cowboy followed familiar trails and tracks, searching the hills, the riverbanks, and the small wooded valleys scattered across the ranch. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the ground, and the cowboy's worry grew. He knew Scout was clever, and the dog had survived on his own before, but something told him that today might be different. Then, in the late afternoon, something remarkable happened. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near a thicket of trees at the edge of the northern pasture. At first, he thought it was another deer or perhaps a coyote, but as he rode closer, his heart leapt. It was Scout. The dog ran toward him, barking excitedly, his tail wagging, his energy boundless after the long absence. Relief washed over the cowboy in a wave so strong that he had to pull himself up in the saddle to contain it. But Scout was not alone. Following closely behind him was a woman, moving slowly and cautiously. She was dressed in worn, simple clothes, her hair long and dark, tied loosely behind her. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also with a quiet strength that caught the cowboy off guard. She appeared thin and weary, her movements careful as if she had been traveling for a long time. Scout, sensing the cowboy's surprise, barked again and ran forward, nudging the woman gently. It was as if he had guided her here on purpose. The cowboy slowed his horse and dismounted, stepping forward with caution but also with an instinctive sense of compassion. Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between them. She did not speak at first, simply standing there, exhausted and wary, as if deciding whether to trust him. Finally, in a soft, hesitant voice, she spoke. I am alone," she said. "I have nowhere to go. Please, can I stay?" Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. She spoke with a quiet dignity, her accent unfamiliar, and her tone carried the pain of someone who had endured loss and hardship. The cowboy studied her carefully. Something about her story seemed genuine, and the way Scout had found her suggested that she truly needed help. The cowboy took a deep breath, considering the situation. His life on the ranch was solitary, and he was accustomed to being alone with Scout, but he also knew the meaning of compassion. He had lived through harsh winters, storms, and the dangers of the wild plains. Helping someone in need was not something he could ignore. "All right," he said finally. "You can come with me, but you must understand life here is hard and there is no one but us. Can you manage?" The woman nodded, relief flooding her expression. Scout barked again, almost as if approving the decision, and the cowboy led her toward the cabin. As they walked, the cowboy noticed the marks of her journey, dusty boots, worn clothes, and small cuts on her hands from traveling through the brush. It was clear that she had been alone for some time, surviving on whatever she could find. When they reached the cabin, the cowboy offered her water and food. She drank slowly, savoring each sip, and ate with a quiet appreciation. Scout sat nearby, watching her carefully, his tail wagging occasionally but never leaving her side. The cowboy prepared a small bed in the corner for her, using blankets and a simple mat, while Scout settled in his usual spot by the fire. It was a humble arrangement, but it was shelter, warmth, and safety, a small haven in the wide, open plains. As evening approached, the woman began to share fragments of her story. She spoke quietly, often pausing as if choosing her words carefully. She told the cowboy that she was from an Apache community, a widow who had lost her family to disease and conflict. She had been traveling alone, seeking a safe place to rest, until Scout had found her and brought her here. Her voice was steady, but the pain in her eyes told a story of loss, resilience, and survival. The cowboy listened attentively, offering little more than occasional nods and quiet murmurs of understanding. He was not accustomed to visitors, and yet there was something about her presence that felt significant. Scout remained a constant presence between them, his gaze shifting between the two, protective but gentle. The cowboy could not deny that he was impressed by the dog's intuition. Scout had never brought anyone to the cabin before, yet here he was, guiding someone in need straight to safety. Night fell, and the cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of the wind outside. The woman sat near the fire, Scout lying close to her feet, and the cowboy settled into his usual chair. There was an unspoken understanding that the cabin now held three lives intertwined, each dependent on the other for comfort, safety, and trust. The cowboy felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. This woman was a stranger, yet the bond formed by Scout's actions suggested that she had been meant to find them. Over the next few days, life in the cabin slowly adapted to include the woman. She helped with small chores, fetching water, preparing food, and caring for Scout alongside the cowboy. Her knowledge of the land and survival skills became apparent, and the cowboy realized that her presence was not just a burden but also a source of guidance. Scout remained devoted to both of them, often herding the cattle with the woman's quiet instructions, showing that the dog had accepted her fully into their little world. The cowboy began to learn more about her life before she had arrived at the plains. She spoke of her family, her village, and the traditions that had shaped her. She had lived through hardships that the cowboy could scarcely imagine, yet she spoke with a calm resilience, a determination to continue despite everything. Her story was not filled with bitterness, but with a quiet strength and an unwavering will to survive. One afternoon, while tending to the northern fields, the cowboy observed the woman and Scout together. She called the dog gently, and Scout bounded to her side, rolling in the grass and barking happily. The sight warmed the cowboy's heart. He realized that Scout's disappearance had not been a cause for fear alone. It had led to this remarkable encounter, bringing someone into their lives who had endured hardships similar to his own, though in very different ways. Evenings became a time for conversation, for sharing stories, and for understanding one another. The cowboy learned that despite their differences, there was a shared humanity between them. He respected her courage and resilience, while she admired his strength and quiet dedication to the land. Scout remained the silent thread binding them, a reminder of loyalty, intuition, and the unexpected ways in which life could change. As days turned into a week, the woman's presence began to feel natural, almost expected. The cabin no longer seemed empty, and the plains felt less vast and lonely. The cowboy found himself talking more, sharing memories, and listening with genuine interest to her experiences. Scout, of course, remained the center of their shared world, his energy and loyalty a constant source of comfort and joy. The cowboy reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them together. A dog's disappearance, a lone traveler, and a quiet act of compassion had transformed his solitary life into something richer, more meaningful, and unexpectedly profound. He realized that life on the plains was not just about survival. It was about connections, trust, and the small, extraordinary moments that could change everything. Yet, despite the comfort of the cabin and the bond forming between them, the cowboy knew that life on the plains remained unpredictable. Storms could arrive suddenly, dangers lurked in the wild, and the world outside their small sanctuary continued to hold challenges. But he also knew that they would face whatever came together, man, woman, and dog, bound by loyalty, trust, and the shared experience of survival. Scout, ever vigilant, never left their side. The cowboy watched the dog one evening, noticing the way he lay close to the woman, ears perked, eyes alert. Scout had chosen to guide her here, and in doing so had created a bond that went beyond words. The cowboy smiled quietly, realizing that sometimes the smallest creatures in life could have the greatest impact. And so, as night fell over the plains, the cabin glowed with warmth and quiet companionship. Outside, the stars blinked in the vast sky, and the wind whispered through the grass. Inside, the cowboy, the woman, and Scout shared a silent understanding, each grateful for the unexpected turn of events that had brought them together. Little did the cowboy know that the days ahead would test their courage, trust, and loyalty even further. Challenges were coming, unexpected, difficult, and beyond anything he had faced before. But for now, the cabin was safe, and their shared journey had begun, guided by the wisdom, courage, and intuition of a loyal dog who refused to abandon those in need. The days that followed the woman's arrival at the cabin passed slowly, each carrying a quiet rhythm that was both comforting and filled with subtle tension. Life on the ranch had always been solitary, but now it was a shared existence. The cowboy had grown accustomed to his routines with Scout, and adding another person into that rhythm required adjustments, small, sometimes difficult ones. Yet beneath the surface of their daily chores, there was an unspoken awareness that their lives had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. The cowboy woke early each morning, as he always did, and Scout was at his side, ready for the day's work. The woman rose shortly after, moving quietly to prepare a simple breakfast. She had learned to help with the daily tasks quickly, fetching water from the well, preparing food, and helping care for the animals. Her movements were precise, careful, and efficient, revealing a lifetime of experience in survival and hard work. The cowboy watched her from time to time, silently impressed by her resilience. She was quiet, but her eyes revealed intelligence, alertness, and an understanding of the harsh world they lived in. Scout, as always, remained the link between them. The dog had taken to following the woman just as closely as the cowboy, running ahead during the morning rounds and circling back to ensure she was safe. It was clear that Scout trusted her, and his behavior reassured the cowboy that the woman's presence was not a threat to their routines or the ranch. He knew that Scout's instincts were reliable. If the dog felt danger or dishonesty, he would make it known. But Scout never hesitated. He had chosen to bring her here, and he continued to act as the silent guide and protector of both. Despite the growing trust, the cowboy felt moments of unease. The plains were unpredictable, and strangers in these parts were often met with caution. He had spent years alone, relying only on his skills, Scout, and the small comforts of his cabin. Sharing his life with someone new, even someone in need, required him to reassess boundaries and trust. He found himself watching the woman carefully, noting the way she moved through the cabin, how she handled the animals, and the way her eyes surveyed the landscape. She was cautious, just as he was, but there was an honesty in her demeanor that eased his worries. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high and cast sharp shadows across the plains, the cowboy decided to take the woman on a short tour of the northern pastures. He wanted her to understand the land, the routines, and the responsibilities that came with living on the ranch. Scout ran ahead, darting between tufts of grass and returning periodically to check on them. The cowboy explained the grazing patterns of the cattle, the location of the water sources, and the areas where predators were more likely to appear. The woman listened intently, nodding occasionally, her eyes scanning the horizon as if memorizing every detail. She asked questions, not out of curiosity alone, but from a practical need to learn. "How do you keep the cattle safe from wolves?" she asked quietly, watching a herd graze near the tree line. The cowboy answered patiently, explaining the methods he had developed over years of working the plains. He spoke of Scout's role, of keeping watch during the night, and of the importance of careful observation. The woman nodded, absorbing every word, and the cowboy realized that she was not just a guest. She was a survivor, capable of adapting to this harsh environment. Evenings at the cabin became moments of shared stories and quiet reflection. The cowboy would sit by the fire, Scout at his feet, while the woman shared fragments of her past. She spoke of her village, the loss of her family, and the challenges she had faced as a widow navigating a world that was often hostile and unforgiving. Her voice was calm, but the weight of her experiences was clear. The cowboy listened in silence, occasionally offering a nod or a comforting word, sensing that her story was as much about survival as it was about trust. Over time, small tensions began to surface, not from conflict, but from the adjustments required to live together in such close quarters. The cowboy was used to solitude, and even small changes in routine could feel significant. The woman, accustomed to relying on her own skills and independence, sometimes hesitated to accept help or instruction. Scout, sensing these subtleties, remained alert, often intervening with a bark or a gentle nudge to remind both humans of his presence and attention. One late afternoon, as a summer storm approached, the tension became more noticeable. Dark clouds rolled over the plains and the wind picked up, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. The cowboy was securing the animals in the corral when the woman appeared, carrying a bundle of blankets. "We need to make sure the cabin is safe," she said calmly, her voice carrying authority born of experience. The cowboy nodded, appreciating her initiative. Together they worked quickly, securing windows, tying down loose boards, and ensuring that Scout and the animals were protected from the storm. The storm hit with sudden intensity. Rain pelted the roof, wind howled through the trees, and thunder echoed across the plains. Inside the cabin, the three of them huddled together. Scout lay between the cowboy and the woman, ears flicking at every sound outside. The cowboy felt a mixture of pride and relief. Despite the storm, they were safe, and more importantly, they had learned to rely on one another in a way that transcended words. As the days passed, the cowboy noticed other changes. The woman began to take a more active role in the ranch, guiding Scout, checking fences, and assisting with the cattle. Her presence, once a source of adjustment, had become an asset. She had knowledge and skills that complemented the cowboy's experience, and together, they managed the ranch more efficiently than ever before. Scout, of course, remained the constant, bridging the gap between the two and ensuring harmony in their shared routines. Yet, despite the growing trust, the cowboy could not ignore the occasional moments of tension that arose from their differences. He was used to making decisions alone, relying on instinct and experience. She was used to surviving through observation, patience, and adaptability. Sometimes their methods clashed, but these disagreements were never harsh. Instead, they led to discussions, negotiations, and a growing respect for each other's strengths. The cowboy realized that these moments of tension were natural and perhaps necessary for the development of mutual trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and red, the woman shared a story that revealed even more of her past. She spoke of her family, the traditions of her people, and the hardships she had endured since losing them. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, and the cowboy listened intently, absorbing every word. Scout lay nearby, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose as if acknowledging her courage. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her resilience, realizing that survival was more than a matter of skill, it was a matter of spirit. Over time, the cabin became a place of quiet cooperation, where each individual's strengths were valued. The cowboy continued his work on the ranch. The woman assisted with daily chores, and Scout remained the vigilant, loyal companion who guided and protected them both. Their lives had become intertwined in ways none of them could have anticipated, and yet there was a sense of balance and harmony that made the challenges of frontier life more bearable. One day, while repairing a section of fence near the southern pasture, the cowboy noticed the woman watching him closely. She held a small bundle of herbs in her hands, carefully picking the leaves and preparing them for drying. "These will help if any of the cattle get sick," she said, explaining the traditional knowledge she had learned from her family. The cowboy nodded, impressed by her resourcefulness and foresight. It was clear that she had not only survived hardship, but had also learned to turn knowledge into action, a lesson he respected deeply. The bond between them continued to grow, strengthened by shared work, quiet conversations, and moments of mutual reliance. Scout remained the anchor, the constant reminder of loyalty and trust. The cowboy realized that their lives had been transformed by unexpected events, and that the challenges of survival were now shared rather than endured alone. Together, they had created a small community of three, bound by experience, compassion, and the unspoken understanding that each one mattered to the others. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows and bathing the land in a warm, golden light, the cowboy reflected on the changes that had come into his life. What had begun as a solitary existence had evolved into something richer, deeper, and more meaningful. The woman's presence, Scout's loyalty, and the shared experiences of hardship and survival had reshaped his understanding of companionship and trust. And yet, despite the progress they had made, the cowboy knew that the plains remained unpredictable. Dangers could appear at any moment and life could change in an instant. But he also knew that they were stronger together, man, woman, and dog, bound by resilience, courage, and the quiet strength of loyalty. For now, the cabin glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet conversations. The stormy days and harsh work of the ranch had created bonds that could withstand challenges yet to come. And as the night settled over the plains, Scout lay between them, the faithful guardian who had brought them together and ensured their safety. The cowboy understood that life would continue to test them, but he also knew that they were no longer alone. The presence of the woman, once a stranger, had become a source of strength, teaching lessons of trust, courage, and the power of compassion. Scout had been the bridge, the guide, and the spark that had created this new chapter in their lives. And so, as the stars appeared in the vast night sky and the wind whispered through the grass, the cabin remained a place of quiet resilience, a small sanctuary on the plains, where loyalty, trust, and shared experience had created a bond that could endure whatever challenges the future might bring. The weeks passed quietly on the plains, each day blending into the next with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The cowboy, the woman, and Scout had settled into a comfortable routine, their lives now intertwined in ways none of them could have anticipated. Yet, beneath the comfort, there was an unspoken understanding that their time together might not last forever. The woman's journey had brought her here, guided by Scout, but the world beyond the cabin was vast, and eventually she would need to continue on her path. The cowboy noticed her quiet moments, the way she often stared toward the horizon as if listening to the wind for guidance. She had grown strong, capable, and deeply familiar with the rhythms of the ranch, but he understood that her heart remained tied to the road she had traveled alone for so long. Scout, ever perceptive, seemed to sense this too. The dog would sit close to her, nudging her hand gently, offering comfort, yet there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes, as if he knew change was approaching. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the plains in soft gold, the woman rose earlier than usual. She moved quietly around the cabin, packing a small bundle of belongings she had brought with her. The cowboy noticed her preparations and felt a mix of emotions, pride in her strength, gratitude for her presence, and a quiet sorrow at the thought of her leaving. Scout, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stayed close to both of them, his tail wagging softly but his eyes alert and watchful. The cowboy approached her, his voice calm but tinged with concern. "You're leaving," he said simply. She nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet resolve. "I must," she replied softly. "The world is wide and I have to find my place in it. But I will always remember this cabin and the kindness you've shown me." Her words were steady, yet there was a vulnerability beneath them that the cowboy could not ignore. Scout barked lightly, as if acknowledging her decision, and the woman knelt to stroke his fur. "Thank you, Scout," she whispered. The dog wagged his tail, nudging her gently with his nose. The cowboy watched, feeling the weight of the moment. In these small, quiet gestures, the bond between man, dog, and woman was clear, one built on trust, loyalty, and shared experience. The cowboy prepared her horse, checking the saddle and reins carefully. They had traveled together briefly before, and he knew the importance of ensuring she was safe for the journey ahead. The woman adjusted her belongings, making sure Scout had a small bag of food for their companion dog, who would travel with her for the first part of her journey before returning. She had grown attached to Scout during her stay, and the dog had come to see her as a friend and protector, just as he had done for the cowboy. Before she mounted her horse, she turned to the cowboy. "I will never forget your kindness," she said, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "You and Scout saved me when I had nowhere else to turn. You gave me safety, hope, and the courage to keep moving forward." The cowboy nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Words were not easy for him, but he understood the weight of hers. He knew that their lives had changed because of the small acts of compassion and courage that had brought them together. Scout barked again, seemingly sensing the emotions in the air. The cowboy knelt and stroked his fur. "Take care of her, Scout," he murmured. The dog nuzzled his hand in response, and for a moment the three of them stood together silent, yet fully aware of the bond that had formed over the past weeks. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of both freedom and isolation, and the journey ahead for the woman was uncertain. As the sun rose higher, she finally mounted her horse, Scout at her side, ready to accompany her for a short distance. The cowboy watched them move across the plains, feeling a mixture of relief and melancholy. Scout ran ahead, barking joyfully, and the woman guided him with a gentle hand, calling his name. The scene was filled with energy, life, and the bittersweet recognition that this departure was necessary for her growth and survival. The journey across the plains was slow and deliberate. The woman led Scout along paths she had learned during her stay, careful to avoid dangerous terrain and unpredictable weather. The cowboy followed on horseback for a short distance, ensuring their safety, and then, when the horizon stretched far ahead, he paused. It was time to let her continue alone. Scout, sensing the end of this chapter, looked back at the cowboy one last time before turning to follow the woman, staying close to her side as she guided him forward. As they moved farther into the open plains, the cowboy felt a strange emptiness. The cabin would no longer be filled with the quiet presence of the woman, and the rhythms of their days would change once more. Yet he knew that life was about more than holding on. It was about trust, courage, and allowing others to follow their path. Scout returned to the cowboy's side, loyal as always, and together they watched the woman disappear over the distant hills, carrying with her the lessons, strength, and memories of their shared time. The days after her departure were quieter than the cowboy had expected. The cabin felt empty in a way that was almost tangible, and Scout seemed to sense the change. The dog stayed closer to the cowboy, his eyes searching the horizon as if hoping for her return, yet understanding that this was not possible. The cowboy threw himself into his work, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the routines that had always defined his life. Each task became a reminder of both solitude and resilience, a balance he had learned to embrace over the years. Despite the quiet, memories of the woman lingered. The cowboy often found himself thinking about the stories she had shared, the lessons she had taught, and the courage she had displayed. Her presence had challenged him to be more open, more compassionate, and more aware of the strength found in trust and collaboration. Scout, too, seemed changed in subtle ways, calmer yet more attentive, as if the bond they had formed had left a permanent mark on both man and dog. Months passed, and life on the plains returned to its familiar rhythm. The cowboy and Scout continued their work, their routines unbroken, yet the echoes of the woman's presence remained in their hearts. The experience had reminded the cowboy that even in the most solitary life, connections could form in unexpected ways, teaching lessons that no amount of time alone could provide. One crisp morning, the cowboy saddled his horse and rode to the northern pasture. The plains stretched endlessly, bathed in golden light, and Scout ran ahead, barking happily as always. As he watched the dog move across the fields, the cowboy felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested them, brought challenges, and introduced unexpected companions, but it had also revealed the power of trust, loyalty, and kindness. He remembered the first day Scout had vanished, the fear that had filled him, and the incredible journey that had followed. He thought of the woman, her courage, and the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive. And he thought of Scout, the loyal companion who had guided them both, teaching him lessons that could not be learned alone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the hills and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the cowboy dismounted and sat on a large rock overlooking the plains. Scout lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. The cowboy felt a sense of peace, a recognition that life on the plains was both unpredictable and beautiful. The challenges would continue, but he was ready to face them, strengthened by the bonds of loyalty, courage, and compassion that had been forged over the past weeks. The cabin behind him remained a small sanctuary, a place of memories and lessons learned. Though the woman had moved on, her presence had left a lasting impact, reminding the cowboy that even the simplest acts of kindness could change lives. Scout, ever faithful, remained at his side, a constant reminder that loyalty and love could bridge any distance or challenge. And so, as the stars appeared in the vast night sky and the wind carried the soft rustle of grass across the plains, the cowboy and Scout sat together in quiet reflection. Life on the ranch would continue, filled with work, solitude, and the beauty of the open land. Yet they carried with them the memory of a remarkable journey, a story of trust, courage, and unexpected companionship that had forever shaped their hearts and strengthened the bonds of love and loyalty. The plains stretched endlessly before them, filled with promise and uncertainty. But the cowboy knew, with Scout at his side, he could face whatever came. And in the quiet moments beneath the endless sky, he understood that some connections, no matter how brief, could leave a lasting mark on the soul, a reminder of hope, humanity, and the extraordinary ways in which life could change with a single act of courage and kindness.